Welcome back to the Changelog. As always, I'm joined by Daniel.
Hey everybody. How's it going? Episode 5.
Episode 5 indeed. We took a bit longer break than normal, but it is vacation time, so things are going a bit slower than normal. So
that's right.
And you're back, and I'm back, so now we can get back to the regular routine of releasing episodes, I think.
Making it happen. That's right. Let's do it. Where should we jump in?
Yeah, you want to start with industry updates?
Well, yeah, I think something that everyone is well aware of, and some more than others, especially interrupting their airline travel, is the big CrowdStrike debacle.
Don't think anybody missed that.
They thought we'd forget about it with our Uber Eats gift cards, but I didn't get anything in the mail, so I'm so pissed off.
That was probably the most poorly executed marketing play I think I've seen in my life. For those not familiar, I believe they sent a $10 or $20 gift card to the affected customers. It's like, you really should not have bothered.
Which was first of all everybody, but then
right
beyond that, just being totally distasteful. What I heard was that when people almost as a joke went to go redeem it, they didn't work. Also, they put it into their Uber account and it got an error. So
yeah. Poorly executed twice.
I don't know what was worse, the actual issue or the cleanup
or the insult
effort. That was just unbelievable. I mean, some people just are not aware, context aware. I don't know what to say.
Yeah. So just to recap roughly, estimated 8.5 million devices were affected around the world, and that's probably on the lower end of estimate, I would imagine. And that essentially meant that all these devices ended up in a kind of blue screen of death scenario where they had to they required manual intervention to recover. And that's a lot of devices to require somebody to do manual intervention. So this was because of the way of this bug, and we can dive into actually what this was in a second, but because of how this was impacted, you could not remotely resolve this. Microsoft cannot resolve this. BitLocker CrowdStrike could not resolve this. So that means that 8.5 million devices had to have somebody come up and physically fix these devices. So I've seen some clever tricks. I've seen people using barcode scanners, because a barcode scanner is essentially just a keyboard, as far as the computer is aware, and fixing it using a keyboard. Use a barcode scanner. But at the end of the day, 8.5 million devices. And most of these devices were in an enterprise environment. And a lot of them had BitLocker on, which is Microsoft's full disk encryption setup. And for those who were affected and also had BitLocker enabled, you not only need to do the recovery steps, there were 2-3 commands you need to run, but in order to do that, you also first had to unlock the device. So you had to enter the passphrase for your BitLocker encryption. And that's where it gets really difficult, right? And so it's not just plug in a keyboard, type these commands, but you also have to type in this potentially long string of characters, which can be 30 some characters of random string from a random string, just to unlock the device, right? So a shit show to say the least. I saw some, Well,
also too, I mean, the blue screen of death is often just used as a figure of speech, but people were literally that was what was showing on airports across the world. I heard even
Delta
it was
was down for 5 days. I think they were no flight for 5 days or something like that.
Yeah, or at least the cleanup, and then even some more serious things the 911 emergency services in the state of Alaska, essentially.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I saw some estimate that the financial cost for this, if you only look at the Fortune 500s, amounted to, I think it was Bloomberg that did this assessment, to $5.4 billion is at the cost of this outage, right? So we're talking insane numbers here, right? So yeah, those not familiar with CrowdStrike, yeah, go ahead.
Well, do you have any updates on like what the internal company fallout has been since then? I mean, like, so obviously someone has to like who or what team like is responsible, or did they kind of consider this like more of a system wide failure? I mean, obviously something happened. Like I saw the images going around of like, I don't know, there was some joke image of like an intern, like, pushing the code and saying like,
he was
early weekend for me.
Fired, actually. It was a joke, but he was subsequently fired. Apparently he was distasteful. Yes.
Oh, that was like an actual CrowdStrike guy. Oh, I just thought it was like a random guy on the internet.
It was a joke, but as far as I understood, he was subsequently fired for making that joke because apparently they didn't find it very tasteful.
Wow. Well, pretty funny, I gotta say. So
yeah, it's pretty insane. But the funny, so this really happened across so many companies, partially because if you are a Fortune 500, you are compliant to certain compliance frameworks, you're usually required to have something called like endpoint security, which basically means like you need to have some kind of agent on your devices to make sure that your devices are compliant with the framework. And this is exactly what CrowdStrike does. Essentially, it's an endpoint security software that is deployed in the enterprise world, and large companies deploy it on everything, which is why we've seen this in the world of signage as well. Even if these are not like workstations, a lot of signage was impacted purely because IT just deploys this on every single device. And what I've heard a lot since this incident is that from people in the IT world, it's basically saying like, well, people choose CrowdStrike because it's the quickest way to get compliant. Not because it's the best piece of software, but it's because it's the quickest path to compliance, really. And what really happened in this particular scenario was that the company CrowdStrike deployed an update, which then automatically over the air got deployed out to so many of these devices across the world automatically without the companies doing anything to actually invoke this upgrade. So like a regular OTA. Now, the problem was that this version that was deployed wasn't fully tested. So apparently the root cause analysis seemed to be that there were some checks, automated checks, that were not conducted properly and were bypassed. And this device, this update was just rolled out automatically to all these devices. Now, the problem is that where this particular software is invoked is very early in the boot process of a Windows device. And this is why the impact was so great, because it started basically a crash loop as soon as the device got turned on. So there was no way to recover. So it was so early on that even if there would have been some mitigation strategy, like if this would have been like inside of Windows when Windows is up and running and this piece of application would have crashed, not a big deal. It would probably like either restart itself or it just dies, right? Not a big deal, but because it happened so early in the boot process, it literally blocked the entire boot from going any further. Yeah. So that's kind of like why it was so severe. And yeah, that's also why we've had a lot of discussions in the tech world since then of like, why was this happening? And people try to kind of find reasons for why it happened, kind of place blame elsewhere. And there was definitely some of the owners, and there's some validity to the argument, could be like, well, if you have 100,000 desktop machines, you should really gatekeep what's being deployed. And there are mechanisms for doing this. Like if you're in the Windows machine, there are mechanisms for like doing what's called canary deployments, where you deploy like a small fleet of devices. If that's working, then you do like we deploy with Screenly, for instance. When we deploy new update to Screenly devices, we do canary deployments. So we start with deploying to I don't know what the numbers are right now, but I think it's like we push it up to 5% of overall fleet, and then we monitor those 5%. If they are fine and we don't see any issues with those, then we go to 10, then 15, then we're incrementally more aggressive over time as we do that. So that's what we call canary deployment. That's normally like a rolled deployment, which is normally the way you do deployments, but that didn't happen here, right? Because when CrowdStrike pushed that out, that build was sucked in and deployed to all these devices just automatically. So there were no safeguards.
I think one thing I saw was that it was somehow being rolled out on local time zones as well. So like at a certain point, people were anticipating this, like, I don't know, 6 a.m. failure. And it was just kind of like getting staged across the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it is crazy that like I don't know, the economics and game theory of the situation made it such that like it was such a instantaneous failure for everyone across the world. And,
Yeah.
I wonder what the long-term effects of that will be in terms of, okay, like deployment gatekeeping things. Are people going to be more serious about that? Are there just going to be other players that are involved and can,
Wow.
at least seemingly get more competition to like this
Well,
CrowdStrike group?
there's plenty of competition, right? But I think what I've heard afterwards, like the reason why CrowdStrike had such a big impact was because they were a tool of choice for a lot of the compliance people, and that's basically like that was the path of least resistance. Now,
Yeah.
what has come to light, I didn't know this before, was apparently so George Kurtz, who's the CEO of CrowdStrike, and I think he's the founder as well. He had a similar incident when he was at McAfee. So he was the CEO of McAfee as well before, and they had a similar incident 15 years ago, much smaller magnitude, but it kind of like twice under the same leadership. That's kind of scary.
Yeah.
So, but
Wow.
yeah, some people.
I mean, as much as people would like to like have someone to pin the blame on, I think that's like the easy way out. Where it's like, oh, this guy's horrible. It's like,
yeah, I agree.
This stuff is going to happen again in 15 years, whether it's under a different name.
Yeah.
Who knows? I mean,
yeah. Some other people. I mean, so Microsoft, I guess, should carry some of the responsibility for this because it really shouldn't be possible to crash a device like that. And the counter argument that Microsoft made, apparently, I haven't really read the details, but it was something along the lines that they were forced to open up this part of the operating system because of some EU regulation, right? And okay, fair enough, but if you did do that, you probably should have had a better safeguards, right? So there is a.
Yeah. I think casting the blame to the regulators is part of the PR playbook for all large tech firms.
I'm sure it is. So there is a counter argument to that, which is basically like, well, fair, but Apple does let you do similar things on their lower level kernel interface. So this is basically a kernel module, essentially, or like an interface with the kernel on Windows. Apple does let you do similar things on Mac OS, but they have a structured way of doing that. So you couldn't, presumably break it in such a glorious way as just happened in the CrowdStrike debate, right? So, but I think the moral of the story is that there are plenty of people that took shortcuts, including CrowdStrike, but also IT teams, right? They probably should have better staging environment and should probably have tested these more properly and just not just like, just deploy it and have fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think when people think of these like, larger failures, like it's often attributed to, more like nefarious underpinnings when, sometimes it's just like how things are set up and like technology is difficult and it's hard to look around every corner and anticipate everything. So,
it's a complex problem nonetheless. I mean, there's no sugarcoating that. It was a perfect storm in so many ways, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm still waiting on my Uber gift card. So, listen,
well, we were fortunately not impacted whatsoever of CrowdStrike, but
hey, I still want my I still want my personal taxi for my burrito. So,
fair enough. Yeah, no, I do feel for the people impacted though, because obviously that wasn't the last people. Because I think it happened Friday to make things even worse, which is like the golden rule of like deployment is like never deploy on Fridays, but. If you want to brick 8.5 million devices, Friday is a good day to do that.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, moving. I think everyone is glad that I think for the most part all those issues are dealt with in some capacity now. Likewise to help block these failure points or total system downings, our protection on the cybersecurity front as well. So with the CISA department in the U.S., there is a program Secure by Design.
It's actually
Screenly
spanning multiple departments. It's not just the US, actually. I think it spans like 10 different equivalent agencies, but yes.
Okay, nice. So Screenly has had some foray into that. I think we should definitely cover that as well, Victor. So tell us, what is the cybersecurity and infrastructure security agencies and other friends? What is the Secure by Design program, and how is Screenly involved?
Yeah, so Screen is the first signage company joining Secure by Design. So Secure by Design is a cross, I guess, it's a program that spans agencies across the world. Like the UK is involved, the US is involved, Japan. Like I think it's 10 or 15 security agencies that are involved in scoping and designing this. But the goal of the program is really to force change onto the software world. And there's one big thing that they are pushing for, which is called radical transparency. So it goes into a lot of details, and we can talk at length what it actually covers. But at the end of the day, what it aspires to do is to raise the bar for supply chain security in the signage world. And it talks both about how you write software, what guardrails you have in place when you do write software, how you deliver software, and how you run that software as well, and how you communicate that to your customers. And when I first heard about this program, I got really excited because it actually touched on a lot of things that I felt been left out in a lot of other compliance frameworks. So if you look at things like SOC 2 and ISO 27001, they're largely documentation exercises. Like, yeah, sure, they do some security. It's great. Like, you get to prove that you have all your ducks in a row. But it's not until you get to the level of NIST cyber security framework, which the second version came out about a month ago. That's the level of security where they actually talk about real security, not just like, oh, do you document how you do backups, or do you document how you do blah, right? So what I liked about this program was that it really allowed us to put our money where our mouth is, right? So we've been beating on the drum of security since inception, essentially. But we never felt like there was a good vehicle to publicly demonstrate that, or at least allow a third-party proxy to validate that, if that makes sense, right? So yeah, we can do ISO, we can do SOC 2, and we are doing SOC 2, right? But a thing that people don't realize is that even if you're SOC 2 compliant, if you're a signage provider, your software that goes on the signage device, completely out of scope for any of these compliance frameworks. So you could have backdoors, you could have horribly written software, you can do whatever you want. Anything that goes on the device, do whatever you want, essentially. They don't care because it's not covered in the framework. It's about some of it is how you ship code, but like you could, without too much effort, silo that entire thing away from your compliance regulations or your compliance scope, I guess. Now, in Secure by Design, you cannot, because it talks about a lot of things. So it kind of spans. It's almost like they're picking things from various compliance framework, including NIST, by the way. So they actually, a lot of the inspiration for the principles, so it's broken into like three main principles, but a lot of inspiration for the sub principles stems from the NIST framework. And they talk about things like you cannot use default passwords, but we know that even in this day and age, in the signage world, it's very common to ship devices with default passwords, right? They talk about what are you doing for encryption? How are you encrypting things? How are you sending traffic? Have you invented your own ciphers? Have you invented your own communication protocols that are probably far less secure than the ones that are actually open and standardized? So that's why I was really excited about it. It's really like, it really allows us to demonstrate all these things that we want, not that we've done all of it, because we definitely have work to be done, but it allows at least to slot all the effort we've been doing regardless into a framework that appreciates it. And that's why we got excited about it.
So tell me, well, with some, so that's definitely a thing in the signage industry, is like some of these newer companies or ones that are maybe like, we've seen definitely some that kind of pop up by niche, and really they're just kind of a landing page for a niche. And then they fast run some software, but then part of that play is that they use this hardware that is basically entirely third party, so they really don't have insight into any of the processes or build of that. So tell me, how would companies who take that route just be unable to be part of this secure by design umbrella?
More or less. So one of the guiding principles, and I think it's principle 1, that states take ownership of security outcomes for your customers. That basically means you can't just say, here's a device, have fun.
Yeah.
It means if you sell them the device, you are responsible for the security outcome. And that can take many shapes and forms depending on what product you will. Because bear in mind, secure by design is not a program designed for signage, right? So some of the founding members were like Google, GitHub, Microsoft, and like basically like the list of people in the program, I think it's 180 companies. So it's really one of 180 companies. And it's essentially who's who of like the top tier security and software companies. And the framework obviously is written in a way that it's applicable regardless if you're GitHub or doing hardware manufacturing or you're doing a hybrid like we are with Screenly, right? So it has bits and pieces to cover all of those scenarios. But I think owning or being forced to own the outcome is a great principle, because I'm so tired of this argument that I've seen for so many years in the signage world in particular. It's just like, we just shipped them some old Debian on these, and it's the customer's problem now. And it's just like, well, it's not, because the reality is that, sure, there are companies out there, very savvy buyers, that will understand this. Well, that will have something like CrowdStrike, for instance, to install on all their endpoints, and they will do updates and they will own the management of all that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
The reality is that a big chunk of buyers, particularly to mid to small size companies, they will buy that under the premise that the vendor owns that, for incorrectly assuming that the vendor will own that patch management, but they don't, right? So then nobody owns it. And that's why I think it was on Gartner that published some reporting that, like, I forgot how many I forgot the exact number. I think it's on our security page. How many attacks that signage is involved, because these are these devices that are like unpatched and unowned, right? And that's it's just sitting on our network, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think like, it definitely is a cop out to say, okay, well, the customer, you deal with that, because I mean, everyone full well knows that most customers, first of all, they don't even have the capacity to do that, or like the know-how. And then secondly, even many of the ones who do, like, they're very much not interested in essentially subsidizing your company's, what should be the security budget, by their own effort. Right. And it just doesn't get done. And then people care about it when something bad happens, right? Which is too late.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I like about this program. Like, you can't bullshit your way through this program, I think, based on the guiding principle in the white paper. Like, these are real hard evidence that you actually do this stuff, right? And you can't just cop out, right? And that's what I like about it. It's actually real tangible. And they go into like far more sophisticated things than most frameworks do. Like things like, how do you make sure that you give your developer as much guardrails as possible to prevent mistakes, right? And then make sure that, how do you do static code analysis? Do you make sure that Do you do peer reviews? I mean, we've done that forever. Do you sign your commits? And things like that are obvious to us, but kind of rare in the industry still. Like they're standard in the real tech world, I guess, but in this world, they're fairly rare, right? And so some of the things we have begun doing way before we even applied this program is like on our signage player, we are rewriting our traditional stack, which initially was written in Python, into Rust. And part of that is for security reasons. Other reasons, performance, but it's also for stability and security. So those are things that are actually mentioned in, I think it's in Principle 2. They talk about these things like making sure you're using the right tools for the right job, for security in particular. So favoring languages like Rust and similar languages where you have a lot more guardrails to do things right. And that's something that I really appreciate coming up in these frameworks.
So one of the pillars there is vulnerability management, and part of that is maintaining SBOMs for essentially the components.
Yes.
Talk to me about SBOMs in digital signage and how Screenly manages those.
Yeah, so SBOMs is software bill of materials, and essentially, I had one of the guys from CISA on my podcast last week, as of this recording, where we talk about this. So he's one of the leading guys for SBOMs. So that's before we talk about SBOMs. Like CISA is just for context of this whole conversation, is an agency that advises other government agencies in the US, and SBOMs were built out of NTIA, which is a National Telecom and Infrastructure Agency, I think it stands from, where SBOMs were originally invented and then kind of were adopted by CISA, and now we have to. Well, I'm not going into details, but SBOMs is essentially a way to describe what goes into software. So Alan, who was on the show, he basically made a good analogy, and he said, when you go into a grocery store, you buy a chocolate bar. You can look at that and say, here are the ingredients for that chocolate bar. But you can't do that for a software vendor. If you go into a software vendor and say, what's in your software? They'll be like, secret.
Yeah.
A software bill of material is a recipe list for what goes into your software. So it would tell you things like, we use these open source projects or open source libraries. We use this tool, not tools, but it talks about like what goes into your software. So it talks about a lot about licensing, that the software license you're using. You talk about the versioning. And then you package that up as an SBOM. You can then share that SBOM with your customers. So at Screenly, we've already had customers requesting SBOMs already. So we are not there at the point where we can deliver SBOMs to our customers yet, but we aspire to do that over the next 6 months or so, where we can actually, if somebody comes to us, we will be able to provide them with an SBOM. Now, there are a few reasons why customers ask for SBOMs. So if you are, for instance, a company selling to the US government, you are mandated by the executive order that was released 2021 from Biden administration. You're mandated to provide an SBOM, and that is effective as of June of this year. So that means if you're selling software to the government, you must provide an SBOM to the government. And they do that for a few reasons. There are two main reasons why people ask for SBOMs. There is license compliance, meaning that what goes into your software, I want to see what goes in. Are those licenses for all those open source projects aligned with our internal policies? So big companies, they usually have policies for open source, right? Most large companies are not allowed to use software using GPL3, for instance, or GPL2 might even be, but they will allow MIT and Apache 2, for instance, as a software license. So that's one use case for SBOMs, where like you can say, well, I want to make sure that your software is compliant with our regulation internally in our policy. So you can basically just feed a policy engine this SBOM, and it will tell you if you're compliant or not. So that's an important use case. But I think that's the government is interested in that, but the industry is probably more interested in that than the government. The second use case is for security. So if you have this list of recipe that goes into your software, you know exactly what piece of software or subcomponent goes in. You know what version of that subcomponent goes in. You can then run that against what's called a CV database or like a vulnerability database. So you can say, actually, this particular version of this particular software is vulnerable to this particular security issue. So there are plenty of tools out there to do that. And you can monitor that, right? And
because obviously that changes over time.
Exactly. And new vulnerabilities pick up all the time. So for instance, at Screenly, we use Dependabot a lot. So our entire CI/CD and our our code base lives on GitHub. So Dependabot monitors a lot of this for us. So when we see, when we see a security fix, a security update, we can easily deploy that update, and then we rebuild our SBOMs because now we have a new piece of SBOM because the building blocks changed, right? So now we have a new SBOM that has addressed that, right? So one of the big things for secure by design is radical transparency, and by that they mean, are you able to provide SBOMs among other things? So that's why these kind of all ties in together. But these were initiatives we did at Screenly before even committing to the whole framework around secure by design. But it's just a testament to the fact that we see eye to eye in terms of how we want the world to look like.
Yeah. Well, but then, it's definitely.
There are other things that are like
Yeah, I mean, I think any type of standards like that, especially ones that extend beyond just the software and get into business practices and some of the hardware components. I think any effort in that direction is good. And I think it's definitely a thing of like, people can talk security a lot, but it's like, all right, are you aspiring or compliant with some of these standards? Are you or are you not, type of thing. So,
and the reality is that it's security is one of those things that we can't need regulation for this. So I'm usually not pro a lot of regulations, but the reality is that for security, you kind of need it to safeguard people that are not savvy enough to understand the risk profile themselves, because the implication is wider, right? So that's why if you don't have any of these frameworks or regulations in place, it's a race to the bottom. Like, why would you care about these things if there's no negative side effect for you as a company to push it on the customer?
Yeah, truly. And I mean, also it's just, it's such a complex topic that it is, it's not reasonable to expect all purchasers to be even, aware of these things, much less able to assess them. And so you need some type of, stamp that says, okay, somebody else
proxy, right? And that's
exactly.
And that's why, like, every single customer will have a security page where they have a bunch of bullshit, frankly. But the reality is that that's where you want to figure. That's where you need these programs to actually have teeth, right? To be able to separate what's marketing bullshit and what's real. And that's what I like about this program compared to a lot of other initiatives I've seen over the years.
Yeah, definitely. So, all right. Well, I think that covers that. One more update we thought was interesting. I know we should talk about is, let's hash it out. So in Switzerland, I believe it's Bern. They're
Vanier.
Okay. Well, I think I don't know. It could be rolled out all across the board. So
sure.
Yeah. So the decision was to not allow outdoor digital out of home advertisements. The concern is that it is just high pollution for the city, and obviously people with monetary interest in it want it. Those who are just citizens walking around probably don't. So tell me a little bit about that, Victor. What was this decision for digital out-of-home signage in Switzerland, and who's affected, and what are your thoughts?
I think it's interesting, right? It's probably the first one I've seen in this. I mean, there might have been others, but it's the first one I've seen at least. And they call it visual pollution. And we've seen more of this over the last few years. People talk about noise pollution, light pollution, and all these things. And I get it, right? In particular, in a country like Switzerland that really is so in tune with nature in general. Like everything is like super oriented towards nature. Like, I understand why these people do not want their entire city to be covered by screens, right? And we obviously in a position where we obviously sell software that runs all of these screens. So don't bite the hand that you feed, that feeds you, as they say. But the reality is, I understand it. Like I have to be honest. Like I understand why people opt out for it, right? Because frankly, most digital out of home ad screens add very little utility for the average person, right? It's a negative externality, I would say.
It's definitely hard to do, like, market segment targeting. I mean, you can, I guess, decide the location, but that's pretty wishy-washy in terms of like who actually sees it.
And what's interesting as well is like this particular town borders Geneva Airport. So I think it's Geneva Airport, one of the airports. It borders. So that obviously makes it even more prone to have big screens, because airports obviously are massive hubs for signage, right?
So I think it said something like something over 400 million euros a year is the digital out of home market size for Switzerland. Definitely real money there. So one criticism of this policy was that, well, okay, you might ban this digital out of home advertisements, but those advertising dollars are really just going to go elsewhere. Maybe it's to other print that's local, or maybe just some of these big technology companies like Meta and Google. I guess that could be seen as a valid criticism, but okay, well, yeah, people got to spend the money, so it has to go somewhere. So,
well, yeah, their marketing budgets are somewhat fixed, right? So if they can't spend it there, they will spend it elsewhere. So yeah, absolutely, that's a valid argument. But I mean, I don't think that invalidates the core principle of the what I guess. I mean, Switzerland is a direct democracy, right? Unlike most countries on this planet, people could actually do these things and actually make them happen. And because this would never pass in the US, right? There's no way this would happen in the US or in most countries in Europe. But because there's way too much lobbying.
Definitely has some freedom of speech lawsuits. I'm sure they could get launched against it and all that.
Massively, right? But it's Switzerland's probably one of the few places that actually could happen, and they actually can make it happen, right? So it's an interesting. It's going to be interesting to follow this, how this plays out. And to your point, it is interesting to see if this actually grows in Switzerland, where those ad dollars will be spent elsewhere, right? Will it just be moving to CPC instead? Maybe.
Sorry, go ahead.
No. But one thing one must say is, like, there is very little utility for ads in the public space, right? Like, there's people pay money for it, clearly, and it's an effective medium, obviously, to some extent. But as the average person who walks by, it has very little utility. It feeds the people that owns the buildings, right?
Right, absolutely. One of the criticisms, though, that I thought was a little bit weird was their environmental green party was saying that the outdoor signs are a waste of energy. I mean, okay, maybe. I don't think that's like,
Well, you say that, but you have to bear in mind that this is Switzerland. Like, you're not allowed to have an aircon in Switzerland. Like, it's literally illegal to have an aircon.
Yeah, I don't know if
their level of greenness is something that I don't think you can phantom.
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to save the polar bears, getting rid of digital out of home, but if it makes people feel good, so be it. So
yeah, fair enough. But yeah, we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah. Well, I think that covers it for episode 5.
I think so.
Always something new going on, but here we're getting back in the season of people coming back from their summer holidays and back to school and happening, and definitely
Back to the grind.
Back to the grind. So I think some exciting things happening for Screenly. So looking forward to sharing it all with you guys in upcoming episodes.
Amazing. Perfect. Thanks, Daniel. Have a good one. Talk soon. Cheers.
All right. See you guys. Bye.